Yo, they sold you the biggest lie of your whole damn life. They told you being solo was some kind of hell, some kind of punishment you gotta fix ASAP. But what if I told you that the exact thing you've been running from, that loneliness, those empty rooms, that silence that hits different at 3 a.m., what if that ain't your weakness? What if that's your superpower? What if being alone isn't some disease you gotta cure, but the most dangerous weapon you were never taught how to use? Buckle up, because what I'm about to show you is gonna flip everything you thought you knew. Machiavelli spent decades watching dudes rise to the top and crash down hard in Renaissance Italy. He studied princes who ran armies and merchants who built straight-up empires, and he peeped something that nobody wants to talk about. The cats who held on to power the longest, they weren't the ones surrounded by a million homies. Nah, they were the ones who knew how to be alone without letting it destroy them. There's a legit reason society wants you plugged into the hive mind 24/7. There's a reason they keep telling you that isolation is sketchy, that you need community, that you need validation, that you need to belong. Because real talk, a person who can stand alone, who don't need nobody's approval to exist, that person can't be controlled. And that scares the hell out of the system. Today, I'm gonna break down what Machiavelli, Schopenhauer, and Nietzsche understood about solitude. Truths so threatening they've been buried under centuries of social BS. You're gonna learn why the crowd is low-key terrified of the individual who walks alone. You're gonna understand the strategic power of isolation. And by the end, you're gonna see your loneliness not as something wrong with you, but as an advantage so deep that most people will never be psychologically built to access it. But yo, this knowledge comes with a price tag. Once you understand what I'm about to reveal, you can't go back to the comfortable lie that connection is always good and solitude is always bad. You ready? Let's get it. In Law 18 of the 48 Laws of Power, Robert Greene drops one of the most mind-bending principles ever written. Do not build fortresses to protect yourself. Isolation is dangerous. On the surface, this seems to contradict everything I just said, but look closer, player. Greene ain't warning against solitude. He's warning against fear-based isolation. The fortress built from weakness, not strength. There's a massive difference between strategic withdrawal and scared retreat. That difference separates kings from cowards. When a prince builds walls because he's shook of his enemies, those walls become his coffin. History is loaded with examples. Louis XVI retreated into Versailles while France was starving. He surrounded himself with yes men. He cut himself off from the reality of his kingdom. And when the mob finally came, those fancy-ass walls couldn't save him. They got his head anyway. But there's another kind of isolation, the kind practiced by Marcus Aurelius, who wrote his meditations alone in a military tent, surrounded by war and death. The kind practiced by Machiavelli himself, who wrote The Prince in Exile, banished from Florence, tortured by the Medici, stripped of everything he built. But check this, he wasn't hiding from the world. He was distilling everything he knew into a weapon. Machiavelli wrote from isolation, but not from fear. He wrote from fury, from clarity, from a position where he had nothing left to lose, and therefore nothing left to mess up his perception. That's the difference right there. The weak dude builds a fortress to escape the world. The strong dude builds a laboratory to understand it. Ask yourself real quick, which one are you building? You've been programmed since day one to be scared of being alone. Think about it for a second. Every kid's story punishes the loner. The wolf is solitary, so obviously he's evil. The sheep who strays from the flock gets eaten. The hero is always surrounded by friends, allies, a whole squad. Isolation is presented as the fate of villains and broken people. This ain't an accident, fam. Societies run on compliance. Economies run on consumption. Both need you to care deeply about what others think. Both need you to seek external validation, like it's oxygen. Both need you to be absolutely terrified of standing outside the group. If you're comfortable alone, you stop buying stuff to flex on people. You stop performing for approval. You stop being a useful cog in the machine of endless comparison and endless commerce. Arthur Schopenhauer, the 19th century German philosopher, saw through this BS centuries ago. He wrote that the person who genuinely enjoys solitude possesses something rare, a self that is sufficient unto itself. But society can't have that. A self-sufficient individual is an economic problem, an emotional weirdo, a straight-up threat to the system of manufactured need that keeps people perpetually hungry for what others provide. So what do? They pathologize you. They slap labels on it. They call it social anxiety. They call it attachment issues. They call it avoidant personality disorder. They invent clinical diagnoses for what might simply be a mind that doesn't need constant stimulation from the herd. Now, I'm not dismissing genuine psychological pain. Mental health is legit, but I am asking you to question whether some of your loneliness is actual pain or just manufactured shame. The question ain't, why am I alone? The real question is, who profits when I believe being alone is wrong? Here's what the strategists understood that regular people never will. Solitude is the birthplace of original thought. Nietzsche climbed into the Swiss Alps alone. He walked for hours in complete silence, his mind absolutely on fire with ideas that would reshape philosophy. Thus spoke Zarathustra wasn't written in some salon surrounded by intellectuals debating over wine. It was written in isolation so profound that most people would have collapsed into straight madness. But Nietzsche didn't collapse. He transcended. He wrote, "The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly." This ain't arrogance, it's observation. When you begin to think original thoughts not borrowed from the group, not validated by consensus, you become invisible to those who can only see through collective eyes. And that's your advantage. When you spend time alone, genuinely alone, without the crutch of distraction, something starts to happen. Your mind stops echoing the opinions of others. Your thoughts stop being reflexive reactions to the noise. You start to hear your own voice, maybe for the first time since you were a kid. Anthony Storr, in his study of creative genius, documented this phenomenon over and over. Newton alone in quarantine inventing calculus. Darwin alone on his estate, for decades developing the theory of evolution. Kafka alone in his room at night, producing literature that would haunt the entire 20th century. They didn't create despite their solitude. They created because of it. The crowd produces nothing original. The crowd consumes. The crowd reacts. The crowd borrows, repeats, and dilutes. Creation is a solitary act. If you're alone right now, you're in the position of the artist before the canvas. The question is whether you're gonna use that canvas or keep mourning the absence of an audience that would only distract you from your work anyway. Machiavelli observed a specific type of prince who always failed. The one who needed too many allies. A prince who can't stand alone becomes a hostage to those he depends on. His alliances aren't choices, they're necessities. And everyone around him knows it. When people sense that you need them, something shifts in the power dynamic. They start to take liberties. They start to test boundaries. They start to treat you as an option rather than a priority because they know you can't walk away. This applies to everything. Friendships, romantic relationships, business partnerships. The person who's terrified of being alone will tolerate disrespect they should never accept. They'll stay in relationships that poison them. They'll maintain friendships with people who barely hide their contempt. They'll agree to trash deals, laugh at jokes that insult them, and bend their whole identity into shapes designed to please whoever is standing in front of them. All because the alternative, being alone, feels like death. But here's the truth that's gonna set you free. The ability to be alone is the foundation of every strong connection. When you can walk away, when you genuinely don't need someone, your relationships transform overnight. You stop negotiating from weakness. You stop accepting crumbs. You start relating from wholeness rather than hunger. And paradoxically, this makes people want you more. And Nellie Rufus, in Party of One, The Loner's Manifesto, describes how those who are comfortable in solitude often attract the deepest connections because they're not grasping, they're not performing, they're simply present. And presence is magnetic. The desperate connector repels. The self-contained individual attracts. This ain't a trick. It's not manipulation. It's physics. Neediness is a repulsive force. Self-sufficiency is gravity. Now let's talk strategy. There's a specific technique that Machiavelli would have absolutely endorsed, one that few people understand and even fewer have the discipline to execute. It's called the strategic retreat. When you find yourself losing ground in any arena, social, professional, romantic, the amateur doubles down. They chase harder. They talk more. They try to prove themselves desperately. And they watch their position erode with every grasping move they make. The Machiavellian does the opposite. They withdraw, not with anger, not with some dramatic announcement, not with theatrics designed to provoke pursuit. They simply become less available, less visible, less eager. In 1512, when Machiavelli was dismissed from his position and exiled to his farm, he didn't beg for reinstatement. He didn't flood the Medici with desperate letters. He retreated. He worked. He wrote. And the prince that emerged from that exile would outlive every single one of his political enemies. When you retreat strategically, several things happen. First, you reclaim your attention. The energy you were hemorrhaging toward people who didn't value you now returns to you. This alone is transformative. Second, you create space for perspective. When you're entangled with people, you can't see them clearly. Distance provides clarity that proximity prevents. Third, you trigger something ancient in human psychology. People value what becomes scarce. When you withdraw without hostility, without explanation, you force others to confront what they may have taken for granted. But this only works if your retreat is genuine. If you're secretly watching your phone hoping for their response, you're not retreating. You're performing retreat while remaining mentally enslaved. The strategic retreat requires actual internal disengagement. You gotta genuinely refocus your energy on your own work, your own growth, your own empire. You gotta become so absorbed in your own development that their absence becomes background noise rather than the main event. This is difficult. But difficulty is the filter that separates those who will use these principles from those who will merely understand them. Arthur Schopenhauer was perhaps the most brutally honest philosopher who ever lived about human nature. He observed something that most people spend their entire lives denying. The majority of human social interaction isn't connection. It's distraction from the unbearable weight of the self. He wrote that a person's value is revealed by how much they enjoy their own company. Those who can't bear solitude are running from something inside themselves, and no amount of social activity will fill that void. It can only temporarily obscure it. This is why extroverts often collapse when forced into isolation. They've never developed an interior life. Their sense of self is entirely dependent on external feedback. Remove the feedback, and they experience something close to ego death. But those who've cultivated solitude, those who've sat with themselves in the dark and survived, they possess something rare. They have a self that is not contingent. They have an identity that doesn't require witnesses. Schopenhauer called this intellectual wealth, the ability to entertain yourself with your own thoughts, the capacity to find endless fascination in your own mind without requiring constant external input. This isn't arrogance. It's not antisocial. It's psychological independence, and it terrifies those who don't have it. Because when they look at you, someone who doesn't need the group, they see a mirror reflecting their own emptiness. They see someone who's escaped a prison they didn't even know they were in. Let me tell you something nobody will say to your face. The crowd hates the individual who walks alone, not because you threaten them physically, but because you threaten them existentially. Your solitude is an accusation. Every moment you spend content in your own company is a silent indictment of their desperate social performance. Every time you choose not to attend the party, not to engage in the gossip, not to chase the approval they spend their lives chasing, you expose the possibility that they didn't have to live the way they've been living. And that's unforgivable. So they'll mock you. They'll pathologize you. They'll call you antisocial, weird, too intense, no fun, difficult. Let them. Nietzsche warned us about the herd mentality, the way the masses enforce conformity not through laws but through social pressure. The raised eyebrow, the whispered judgment, the slow exclusion of anyone who doesn't comply. But the herd's power only works on those who still want to belong. The moment you genuinely release the need for their acceptance, their weapons become useless. Their contempt becomes irrelevant. Their judgment becomes what it always was: the frightened bleating of those who can't imagine existence outside the flock. Susan Cain documented in Quiet how introverts have been systematically devalued in Western culture. The extrovert ideal, gregarious, talkative, attention-seeking, has been positioned as health itself. Meanwhile, the contemplative, the reserved, the solitary are treated as broken versions of the correct personality. This is cultural propaganda, not psychological truth. Some of the greatest achievements in human history came from minds that required solitude. Einstein developed relativity alone in a patent office. Wittgenstein retreated to a cabin in Norway. Emily Dickinson barely left her room and produced poetry that would outlast empires. The crowd produces noise. The individual produces legacy. Choose which you want to be. Now we arrive at the core technique, what I call the transmutation. This is the alchemical process of converting the lead of loneliness into the gold of sovereignty. Most people never complete this transformation because they're too busy medicating their solitude with cheap distractions. They scroll, they swipe, they numb. They fill every silent moment with noise because they can't face what the silence contains. But you're still here, which means you might be ready. Stage 1, acknowledgement. You gotta stop pathologizing your aloneness. Stop treating it as a problem to solve or a disease to cure. Your solitude isn't a symptom. It's raw material. Every hour you spend alone is an hour uncontaminated by the opinions, expectations, and projections of others. This is extraordinarily rare. Most people live their entire lives never experiencing a single day of genuine psychological independence. Their thoughts are borrowed, their preferences are manufactured, their identity is a composite of influences they never examined. But you, in your isolation, you have access to something they don't, an unmediated relationship with your own mind. Stage 2, excavation. In solitude, without the distraction of social performance, you begin to encounter parts of yourself you've been avoiding, fears you suppressed, desires you denied, shadows you pretended didn't exist. This is where most people retreat back to the noise. The excavation is painful. You find things buried inside yourself that you don't want to face. But Machiavelli understood that the leader who doesn't know his own weaknesses will be destroyed by them. Self-knowledge isn't optional. It's strategic necessity. And self-knowledge is only available to those willing to sit in the dark long enough to see what's there. Stage 3, integration. You take what you discover, the fears, the wounds, the shameful desires, the unacknowledged rage, and you incorporate it into your conscious identity. You stop pretending to be only light. You accept the darkness and therefore gain power over it. Carl Jung called this shadow work, but Machiavelli was practicing it centuries before psychology gave it a name. He integrated the ruthless parts of human nature that polite society pretends don't exist, and because he accepted them, he could wield them rather than being controlled by them. Stage 4, construction. Having cleared the debris of conditioning, having excavated and integrated your hidden self, you now have something most people never possess: a foundation. Having cleared the debris of conditioning, having excavated and integrated your hidden self, you now have something most people never possess: a foundation. Not according to what will get the most approval. You build according to your own architecture. This is what it means to become sovereign. A sovereign isn't someone who rules others. A sovereign is someone who rules themselves. Their kingdom is internal. Their throne is psychological. And no external circumstance can truly dethrone them, because their power doesn't depend on external conditions. This is what your solitude can give you if you're willing to take it. Let me show you this transmutation in action through history. In 1302, Dante Alighieri was exiled from Florence, banished under penalty of death if he ever returned. He lost his political position, his property, his home. He wandered Italy for the rest of his life, never seeing his city again. Most men would have been destroyed, but Dante took his exile and transmuted it into something immortal. The Divine Comedy, one of the greatest literary works ever created, was written in that wandering isolation. The journey through hell, purgatory, and paradise wasn't just allegory. It was autobiography. A man who'd lost everything descending through his own darkness and emerging transformed. Dante's exile wasn't his punishment, it was his liberation. Had he remained in Florence, caught up in political games and social performance, he would have died as a minor politician, remembered by no one. His exile freed him from the distractions that would have consumed his genius. Consider also Seneca, the Stoic philosopher and advisor to Emperor Nero. When Nero turned against him and forced him into exile on Corsica, Seneca didn't despair. He wrote letters, Stoic works that would influence philosophy for 2,000 years. In his Letter on Solitude, Seneca writes, "Set aside a certain number of days during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, 'Is this the condition that I feared?'" He wasn't afraid of isolation. He practiced it deliberately because he understood The dependence on external circumstances, whether social, material, or emotional, was the true prison. In 1845, Henry David Thoreau retreated to a cabin at Walden Pond. He lived alone for 2 years, deliberately simplifying his existence to discover what was essential. What emerged from that solitude wasn't just a book. It was a philosophy of resistance. Walden taught generations that the life of quiet desperation lived by most people was optional, that you could step outside the machine, that solitude wasn't exile, it was emancipation. Thoreau wrote, "I never found the companion that was so companionable as solitude." These men didn't suffer from their isolation. They were forged by it. All right, let's get practical. How do you weaponize your solitude? First, establish productive rituals. The danger of unstructured isolation is that it devolves into rumination, the same dark thoughts circling endlessly with no resolution. This is destructive solitude. Productive solitude requires architecture, daily rituals that channel your alone time into creation, writing, training, building, studying. Machiavelli in his exile had a specific ritual. He'd work his farm during the day. Then, in the evening, he'd change into formal clothing, the robes he once wore in political office, and enter his study. There, he'd engage with the ancient masters, reading and writing as though he was still at the center of power. This ritual was psychological. It maintained his identity as a thinker and strategist, even when circumstances tried to reduce him to a farmer. Your rituals perform the same function. They maintain your identity as someone building toward a larger purpose, even when no one is watching. Second, develop intellectual companionship. You may be alone physically, but you need not be alone intellectually. Books are conversations with the greatest minds who ever lived. When you read Machiavelli, Marcus Aurelius, Schopenhauer, you're in dialogue with intellects that understood what you're experiencing. This isn't a replacement for human connection. It's a different kind of connection, one that transcends time and space, one that can't be taken from you, regardless of your social circumstances. Build your library deliberately. Choose authors who challenge you. Engage with ideas that force you to think rather than merely consume. Third, create evidence of your progress. The danger of solitude is losing track of your own growth. Without external feedback, you can feel stagnant even when you're advancing. Counter this by creating tangible evidence. Write daily. Track your training. Document your development. Build a record that you can look back on and see objectively that you're not standing still. This evidence serves another purpose. When you eventually re-enter social spaces, and you will, you'll have something to show for your time in the darkness. Not explanations, not excuses, results. Fourth, practice strategic reemergence. Solitude is a phase, not a permanent state. The monk who retreats to the mountain eventually returns to the valley. When you reemerge, do so strategically, not desperately seeking connection, but offering something of value. The perspective you gained, the skills you developed, the clarity you cultivated. People will sense that you're different. They'll feel the weight you carry. The solitude will have changed your presence in ways you may not fully understand, but they will certainly perceive. Here's what they'll never teach you in any self-help book, any therapy session, any social skills course. There are people who are meant to walk alone. Not forever, not completely, but essentially. They're not broken. They're not damaged. They're not missing something others have. They're simply built for different conditions. The way some animals thrive in Arctic cold that would kill others, the way some plants grow in desert conditions that would wither a forest tree. Your constitution is different. Your internal wiring is different, and no amount of forcing yourself into the mold of the extroverted the gregarious, the perpetually social, will change that fundamental architecture. Schopenhauer wrote that ordinary people think merely of how they shall spend their time. A person of intellect tries to use it. Perhaps you're not lonely. Perhaps you're simply using your time differently than those who can't bear to be alone with themselves. This doesn't mean isolation is always good. There is pathological withdrawal, the fear-based hiding that Machiavelli warned against. But there's also sovereign solitude, the strategic positioning of one who has work to do that the crowd can't understand and would only interrupt. The question you gotta answer honestly: which one is yours? If you're hiding from life because you fear rejection, that's a wound to heal. But if you're alone because you've discovered something in that aloneness that can't be found in company, then you're not sick, you're awakening. And the world will tell you that you're wrong. The world will tell you that connection is everything and isolation is death. The world will pathologize your preference and medicate your solitude. Ignore them. They don't understand what you have access to. They can't comprehend the forge you're building yourself within. They're speaking from their own terror of silence, a terror you've already begun to overcome. So, where does this leave you? You're alone. Maybe right now. Maybe tonight. Maybe tomorrow. And instead of treating that aloneness as a problem to escape, you can now see it as a territory to explore, a laboratory to experiment within, a forge to shape yourself. You're not being punished. You're being prepared. The solitude you're experiencing is stripping away everything that wasn't really you. The false identities, the performed personalities, all of it is being burned away in the fire of your isolation. What remains is essential. And from that essence, you'll build something that doesn't require external validation to stand. Something that can't be shaken by rejection or abandonment. Something that is yours in a way that nothing connected to the approval of others can ever be. Machiavelli didn't write The Prince to be liked. He wrote it to be true. And that truth, unflinching, uncomfortable, eternal, outlasted every prince and politician of his era. Your solitude can produce the same. Not a book, perhaps, but a self so integrated, so clarified, so deliberately constructed that it doesn't bend to every social wind. That's the gift hiding inside your loneliness. Take it. There's more I want to show you, layers of this that I can't reveal here. If this resonated, if something in you recognized these words as something you already knew but had never heard spoken, understand this: what I share publicly is only the surface. There are territories of human psychology I can't discuss openly. There are strategies of power and self-mastery that would be suppressed, demonetized, buried by those who benefit from keeping you asleep. Those exist behind the join button. If you're still here at the end, you're not like the others who clicked away. Subscribe if you haven't already. But if you want access to what's hidden, click join and enter the architect level. You'll find what I can't say here. Most won't. That's precisely the point. And as you close this video, carry this thought with you. The next time you're alone, truly alone, and that familiar ache begins to rise, stop. Ask yourself, what if this isn't my sentence, but my preparation? The crowd can't hear what the silence is teaching you, but you can.